All right, first things first, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the next CTAS Education Clinic. Today's conversation is going to be on something that we all want to do more for the most part, but typically struggle with to an extent, or at least some of us do. And although I think everyone recognizes the importance of this particular activity, uh, understanding the importance doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to optimize ourselves with this, nor does it mean that we completely understand all of the intricacies involved with this particular activity. So what we're going to be talking about today is the science of sleep. With that, because we're always talking about different forms of program design, we're always talking about different forms of making sure our soldiers are at their peak, both in health, fitness, and overall cognition. We need to discuss a few things revolving around rest and recovery. So how you're actually resting through your training, and then of course the ultimate form of rest, which will be sleep. This is primarily going to be a conversation over Teams this morning, rather than a hybrid of Teams and in person as we've had before. Just keeping that in mind for the recording. And at all times, if you have a question, please just let me know and go ahead and unmute yourself, ask that question, and participation is always very welcome. So to kind of get things started with this, and I'll ask you first with the Sergeant Watts, what is your normal pattern and habits rather, with regards to sleep?
Okay, in regards to sleep, I try to at least tone everything down like around 9 o'clock because I typically wake up like around 4:40 every morning.
Okay.
But on the weekends, obviously, sometimes I may not stick to it, but probably more than likely on that Sunday, heading into the work week, I always try to stick to that schedule. Go to bed like around 9, wake up 4:40.
So you try and get just about that 8 hours, maybe a little less?
Roger. Yep.
So what does that normally look like for you? You mentioned going to bed around 9 to be able to wake up at 4. Is there anything else that you change in your overall environment or your habits to establish prior to you going to sleep?
Right. So what I do is like I don't be on my phone. I make sure my room is like extra dark, and I just go to sleep because I know like if I don't stick to that, it affects my energy and I just feel off.
Okay. Now, Sergeant De La Garza, if you are still uh, there and able to actively participate, or Lieutenant Colonel, what are your normal habits with regards to sleep? All right, and that's fine. Like we've said before in these sessions, I'm trying to set this up so individuals can passively participate if they are, active in their office and doing other things. So we'll move on from there and get into the topics. In today's agenda, we're going to be talking about the difference between overreaching and overtraining, which largely comprises of some of the elements we've discussed before with program design and how that relates to rest and sleep. Then we'll be talking about the two primary different types of rest with regards to physical activity and our activities throughout the day in general, and then getting deeper into some of the scientific aspects of sleep. All right, so we'll start this with the overreaching and overtraining. Now, for some of our soldiers, and we've talked about this with resiliency and sports psychology, part of the issue, or rather challenge, that we have as leaders is trying to figure out what motivates some of our soldiers to become more active, right? How do we get them to start to understand the positive benefits of physical exercise and optimizing their nutrition habits? How do we get them to understand the risks involved? And sometimes, this is just letting them understand the administrative requirements of being in our occupation. But often I like to take the approach of helping them really recognize the detriments that can happen to their overall quality of life if they're not staying as up to date and as regular with each of these practices. But on the other end of that spectrum, those of us that are typically in this room and that are participating in a lot of these events, we don't usually have the issue of trying to stay active. We usually have the issue of being too active. And I've said before in our program design class, the best program you can ever be on in your life is one where you're doing the least amount of work, right? So the least amount of frequency, lowest amount of frequency throughout the week, but you're still seeing progress. But that's not always the reality of how people practice, right? Typically, when people do start getting to training, they may start 3 days a week. They may eventually move to around 5 days a week. And then they go to, 2-a-days, trying to get it in wherever they can get it in. This can create a very detrimental situation when it comes to our nervous system and how our body repairs into the two states that you see on screen, either overreaching or overtraining. Now, overreaching, the one you see on the left side of the screen, can actually have a very positive benefit, but it only has that if done in a very specific way, and if not done in that specific way, it can be very dangerous, which of course inherently means that you have to understand what overreaching is. And starting watch, do you know what overreaching is by definition, or have you ever practiced this?
Negative, sorry. Nope. I have no
All right,
idea.
that's fine. So when we're trying to program in general, we're always trying to overload. Overload in its essence means that if you are trying to hit 10 repetitions of an exercise, or you're trying to hit a certain pace when running to a certain distance or time, that intensity should be your maximal intensity that you can manage for whatever volume that you've prescribed, right? So if I put a certain weight on a bar and I wanted to do 5 sets of 8, I should be able to get all 5 sets at 8, but maybe not 9, maybe not 10, certainly not 11. Same thing if I wanted to have a specific pace that I could run for half a mile. I want to make sure that it's not a pace I could run for 3/4 of a mile. It should be my hard half a mile pace. By doing so over time, and then slowly increasing that intensity, which is the progression piece, we're introducing something called progressive overload, which is one of the key elements to actually improving performance. And one thing a lot of people are missing, which is why people stay at the same weight and same pace for a long time. Well, you can introduce a state of overreaching in a short-term aspect by essentially taking that intensity and going absolutely to the point where you have nothing left. This is your muscle failure in resistance training. This is some of your anaerobic work when it comes to sprinting, maybe actually sprinting at the 90-second limit and doing a heavy volume of it, something where it takes your body quite a bit of time to recover from, usually no less than 72 hours. If this is done, and typically only once in a week, maybe every 3 to 6 weeks, you can enter a state of overreaching in which you allow the body to do something called supercompensation. And that supercompensation can be very good at helping athletes overcome a plateau. So if you've been trying to increase your strength for a while, you've been trying to increase maybe your acceleration or deceleration for a while, and you've been on a training plan for say 10, 12 weeks, and everything else has been going well. You've been hitting frequency the way you need to, intensity, volume, everything that you need to, but you're still not seeing progress, then sometimes entering a state of overreaching is the exact thing you need in order to get better. Now, unfortunately, without understanding this, you'll have a lot of soldiers that do go into the gym trying to train, trying to focus on their aesthetics, and they get to muscle failure almost every single session. Or when they're going and running, they're either not pushing themselves hard enough, or they're maybe pushing themselves too hard. If an individual stays in a chronic state of overreaching, meaning that they're constantly introducing this level of stimulus to their body, they can enter a very detrimental state called overtraining. Now, overtraining is something that it is not a positive adaptation that allow you to supercompensate like overreaching does. When you consistently over reach to get to overtraining, this is where you end up greatly increasing your risk of injury. And you enter a state of central nervous system fatigue that can make you have to take maybe 1, 2, 3 weeks off of training in order to recover from. If this situation gets so severe that you enter overtraining syndrome, which you'll see on that second bullet, OTS. Overtraining syndrome is something that is quite rare in the general population, but it does happen with high-performing athletes. If you stay in overtraining too long, you can get into a situation where you're almost undergoing a nervous system injury. Overtraining syndrome has been shown to either cause bouts of insomnia, cause bouts of restless sleep for weeks, if not months. It can increase risk of suicidal tendencies, depression, and many other things. Very often, if a high-performing athlete gets overtraining syndrome or they get diagnosed with overtraining syndrome, they typically even have to be hospitalized for a few weeks to a month or so, which is absolutely what we don't want, because that could set your progress back for 4, 6+ months. So it's extremely severe. Good morning. It's an extremely severe syndrome that we want to make sure that we can stay away from, which is why we need to ensure that we're resting as much as possible, or at least introducing rest as much as possible. Are there any initial questions on overreaching or overtraining?
Negative. All right.
You can sit over here, Sean Lightning, just so you can see the screen on that side. Yeah. So, and this is now that Sergeant Lightning is in this room, and for you, Sergeant Watts, anyone else in the team's aspect, when you're thinking about introducing rest within your actual training session or within your overall training program, how do you currently go about it?
As far as in rest and during the training movement, or like rest as far as in
Throughout your days.
already? Okay. So like I said, I feel like it's more about what I actually set up as far as the actual training. So for the rest days, rest periods, like I won't use if I did bicep and tricep day, rest day, I will try my best for, I guess, within those 2-day periods.
Okay.
Not to use that body part in that aspect. Also, instead if I'm doing like different strengthening conditions, so one will be lift heavy, cut muscle, and then the next time I'll actually do the same exercise would be more like less weight, but
more volume.
more rep, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, what about you, Sergeant Watts? How do you program rest type days throughout your weeks?
I mean, sometimes I kind of program it depending on for one, how I feel and what's going on during that week. But typically, I always try to have like at least one rest day during the week. Typically, like an active rest day.
Okay, so what do you consider an active rest day? It's a good point.
Just pretty much something like low intensity, but not completely shutting everything down. Like, whether it's like walking or whatever I choose to do, or whether it's like mobility work or whatever I feel I need to brush up on.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So when we've talked about programming for resistance training, cardiovascular training, or any type of physical exercise in order to improve our performance, we've talked about the importance of looking at different variables, right? Exercise selection, intensity, volume, frequency, rate of perceived exertion, and all of these things that really allow us to get better. Right? Everything that we do when we actually train should be done with intent. On Tuesday, we talked about that with regards to the warm-up, the different forms of warm-ups, right? How you can design your warm-up specifically to you in order to strengthen your weaknesses and improve your overall performance while mitigating injury. Well, rest is another critical component of that. Not only your intra-set rest, which is the rest that you take in between sets, whether in resistance training or some type of interval work, but the actual rest in between sessions, what you're doing for the rest of the day, what you're doing the following day, and how all of that is comprised into your total program, whether that's a microcycle, which again could be 1 to 4 weeks, or a mesocycle, which can typically be 4 to about 12 weeks long, right? So with that, we have 2 primary types of recovery. Those two primary types of recovery are active and passive, right? So the active is what Sergeant Watts alluded to, and then the passive is something that Sergeant Latney alluded to. An active rest, more often called active recovery, is an actual training session. But to make it the most effective, an active recovery session should look exactly like another day in your training session, with the entire exercise order, the entire the muscle groups that are used, the joint actions that are done, the exact movement patterns that are done at proper intensity for your training session are what you're going to use for your active recovery session. The difference is that you're going to decrease both intensity and volume by up to about 30%.
Okay.
Right. So what this allows you to do is it still patterns your neuromuscular pathways. You're still setting that muscle action potential by voluntarily innervating those muscles, but you are not doing so at an intensity that would cause your body damage relative to what you are already training. Right. So it's not that you just use lightweight arbitrarily, because 5 pounds isn't 5 pounds to everyone, right? 10 pounds isn't 10 pounds to everyone with regards to capabilities in a specific movement. It's that wherever you are currently at within your training session, which is going to be different for strength, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, etc. If you lower it by about 30% on each, you're still able to train the body without taxing the body.
Okay.
Now, these active recovery days are good to be able to have throughout your normal weeks, but because they do take away a complete training session, athletes that are really trying to push themselves generally only have these active recovery sessions on their deload weeks,
Okay.
which is typically every fourth week in a program. All right, so if you have a 12-week program, basically weeks 4 and 8 will be your primary deload weeks, depending on what type of, if you have a competition coming up or not. If you have no competition, then 4, 8, and 12 will be your deloads. If you have a competition at the end of that 12, then you typically peak around 10, you deload around 11, and ramp up 12 to the competition without increasing your risk of injury.
Okay.
So that's the kind of the definition and the utilization of an active recovery session, which are of paramount importance. On the other end of this scope, we have a passive recovery session. A passive recovery session is what we call a rest day.
Rest day.
And that's where you are doing absolutely no physical exercise. Right now,
is there no physical exercise in that capacity as far as the actual movement or that particular area that you worked out, or is it no exercise period?
So that's a good question. So for those on teams, if you weren't able to hear Sergeant Latney, what he asked was, does that no exercise pertain to simply not hitting a body part and joint that you've already trained, or does it mean no exercise overall? Right. So for a passive rest day to be at its highest level of efficacy, you want to ensure you're doing absolutely no physical exercise in that day at all. In fact, you even want to limit your NEAT, which is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That's you parking further away in a parking lot and walking, or taking the stairs versus the elevator, mowing the lawn, going on a hike with the kids or the dogs. All of those things that aren't necessarily very physically taxing, but they're still introducing,
Right.
they're still activity, correct. It's not exercise activity, but still activity. For a complete rest day to be at its highest level of efficacy, you want little to no movement at all in that day. Maybe waking up and moving your joints just to get some of your fluids moving, but other than that, no exercise.
I can't imagine a lifestyle where I literally can't. Well, I literally can't like this. I always have to do something that's gonna require physical activity from my part, like whether it's like house chores or whatever. Like especially like people with kids. If you have kids, you will be happy to do some type of physical activity.
This is
Like,
true.
you can't just be like, okay, nope, I'm just laying in bed all day. That's not the real world.
Right. Well, and Sergeant Rodriguez brings up a good point, right? When we're talking about the practicality of an actual rest day, the intent isn't for you never to get out of bed or for you to sit on the couch. The intent is to ensure that you're not getting your heart rate up, that you're not doing something that will fatigue any of your musculature. This could involve carrying things.
No little to nothing that's stressful to the
Yes,
body.
as much as you possibly can, right? So with children, You know, for me, it's my 2 dogs that are very active. I love to be able to walk them when I don't have to, you know, come to work and things of that nature. So those activities can still take place, but just limiting them as much as possible
Instead of
is
you
the
walking
most
2
beneficial.
miles, I just walk up the street and that.
Correct. Exactly. So with that, when you are planning this into your program, you generally don't want to have 2 passive rest days in a row, which is we sometimes call the weekend,
Right.
right? So sometimes
I ain't got none of that.
we try and program so much into our work week, and then we have 2 complete rest days, and that's fine if that's what works for an individual schedule and they're still seeing performance. They're not really feeling any type of, you know, prolonged stress that's, you know, increasing the risk of injury and things of that nature. Then that's okay. It's not necessarily optimal, but it's not bad. It would be better if you were able to change the programming of your week so that maybe you take a Thursday off and then Sunday off, right? Completely. That way you kind of break up that aspect. But if you are in a training program that is consistently improving or consistently increasing intensity, whether that's through running, cycling, swimming, you know, doing foot marches, resistance training, etc., you always at the culmination of that event that you are training for, the culmination of that program, want to consider taking completely 1 to 2 weeks off of exercise.
Okay.
And it's difficult. It's difficult because, as Sergeant Rodriguez kind of brought up, the mentality of it, when you do really start training all the time and you've added that to your behavioral pattern, it is an addictive activity.
Every night.
And that comes from the hormones that are released during exercise. Just like anything else that we greatly enjoy, eating food, or, you know, even when it comes to gambling and anything else that, you know, playing video games, stuff like that. Well, the reason it becomes addictive is because you have hormones like serotonin and dopamine that are reward pieces to your body. Your perception of life changes with the amount of these hormones in your body. If you have a chemical imbalance of these and you're at a extreme detriment of them, or you're extremely deficient in both of these, this is something that can actually cause depression, right? Suicidal tendencies and many other things, which is why when we're talking about overtraining, when you imbalance those hormones by being too active consistently and too much in that activity, you can actually reach overtraining syndrome, which is where the suicidal tendencies come in. So it is very important we're trying to manage our hormones. Losing that 1 or 2 day, even that 1 or 2 weeks for the most part of training won't set you back as much as many of us think.
Right.
If you remember our training residuals, your maximal strength and aerobic capacity can last 25 to 35 days.
Right.
So it's very good to be able to consider taking that time.
And I was going to
off.
ask you, before you just mentioned, like, is there a minimum and a maximum of rest period time that you can have? Like for me, like I said, say more than 3 days for me, I feel like I'm starting all over again. I hate that feeling. But
It happens to me like running. Like if I don't run for like 4 days, I feel like I'm starting to run all over again.
yeah, so
Interesting.
So I was saying, like, is there a minimum? Like, say if my rest day, or even in the program, the rest day was just this Sunday.
Mhm.
Is it somewhere down the line between those, like I said, the 4 to 12 weeks that I do take the 2 weeks off? Like, is it
So-
absolute? Like, is it?
To a degree, Sergeant Watts, can you hear their conversations? I should have done this check earlier.
Roger, I can hear them, Sunrise.
Okay, perfect. So with regards to the minimum and the maximum on when you should take rest days, when you should program rest days, and really all of this comes back to that importance, right? Rather than just walking into a gym or getting on a track, getting out in the street and doing something arbitrarily that day, if you want to maximize your capability of getting better, which hopefully we should, right? If we're going to spend the time doing something, we want to get the most out of it, the most, you know, back for the amount of money, in this case, time that we're spending. The type of activity you're doing and where you are in your program will indicate how much you should rest. If you've just started a program, and most programs start in a preparatory phase for the first, say, 6 to 10 weeks in, say, muscular endurance and hypertrophy, or in a very long duration, low intensity activity if it comes to aerobic capacity, such as foot marches and running and swimming. If you start in those, the need of a passive rest day is very low.
No. Okay.
Because you haven't introduced enough cumulative central nervous system stress to necessitate the need of that
Rest day.
of that rest day. Correct. So this is why with active recovery, you typically have it every 4 weeks, right? So you'd be ramping up your intensity for 3 weeks consistently. Then you would take an active recovery week or a deload week on that 4th, and then you would pick back up where you were on the 3rd, if not a little bit higher than the 3rd on the 5th week, and continue that piece. When you get to the end of whatever your mesocycle is, maybe 12, maybe 16 weeks, at that point, you would want to consider taking an entire week or 2 off. Then you would transition into your next mesocycle. So say you started in hypertrophy, maybe around 12 repetition maximum in the gym, where you're doing a traditional bodybuilder split, right? So back and buys, chest days on Mondays, and that kind of thing. You could stick with that for about 10 to 12 weeks, taking those active recovery. Then on, say, week 14, so if you take week 13 off, on week 14, you could get into a basic strength pattern, where maybe you're doing 3x5s or 5x5s, and then working with that for another about 8 to 10 weeks. And then you would cycle that to make sure that you're focusing on your actual musculature, or you're focusing on your neuromuscular strength. And then each mesocycle would focus on something different to allow you to consistently progress depending on what you would be lacking.
Okay, that makes sense.
Your maximal time off comes to training residuals rather, right? So with aerobic and strength, as aforementioned, 25 to 35 days. If you're taking 35 plus days off without hitting strength, you will start losing strength.
Okay.
You will start losing your maximal aerobic capacity. Muscular endurance and anaerobic capacity are about 15 plus or minus 3 days, right? So you have about between 12 and 18 days where that'll come in, which are your primary focuses. Remember, maximal speed and maximal power is 5 plus or minus 3 days. So you'll lose, because the amount of coordination has to happen with your fast twitch muscle fibers, you'll lose your maximal speed and your maximal ability to produce force in a very short amount of time, which is generally why it's not even touched until the end when you're starting to peak, because you'll progress it, you'll supplement that with your strength training, and then you'll get to that point, you'll peak with it for a few weeks, and then you'll compete, and then you back off from it again, because it's a high risk of injury because of the amount of intensity, and you can't feasibly maintain it at its maximal capacity without almost never taking any type of rest.
You work up to it for showtime.
Correct, absolutely, and you see that with every type of sport, right? There's where you have off season and preseason, in season, etc. So it's the same thing with programming. You don't necessarily want to do the same thing at all times. You want to be able to always target your weaknesses. Good.
7 years doing the same thing. 7 years doing the same thing.
Are there any questions on the differences in these types of recovery? All right, so that takes us into one of the primary points of this particular lesson, which is when we maximally recover, which is when we sleep. Now, sleep is a very, very interesting thing. It's something that we're constantly studying. There's still so much that we don't know about it, but we know that we need it, absolutely, and we do it every single day. With our occupation, though, it's extremely challenging, right? One, because we may be able to have to go to a completely different environment, right? We may have different stresses involved in that environment. Our overall, tasks, depending on our occupation and our duty and our position at that time, may involve us doing type of swing shift work, or may involve us only working at night because it's the only time we can operate. Right. There's so many specific variables that with regards to our operational environment that make it extremely challenging for us. So it is even more important that we as leaders and we as soldiers understand how we can approach this and what we can do to mitigate some of the issues that we constantly see with regards to sleep. So Sergeant Watts, you mentioned earlier that you try and get about 8 hours of sleep. Do you think that's best for you, or do you think that's exactly what everyone should try and get?
I think that's just best for me, because I mean everybody's different. Too much sleep may I know I've heard some people say, if they get too much sleep they feel even worse, or different like that. So I mean it just varies person to person.
And there are absolutely individual variances. Sergeant Latney, how much sleep do you think the average person should need, though?
I would say approximately like 4 hours.
Okay, why do you say 4 hours?
I don't know. It's more like a functional thing. So I feel like if I was to split it up, 2 hours is like a nap. hour and a half or to 2 hours like that. 4 hours, I guess, is because you go into, I guess what you would call like within 2 hours is your body transitions like a deep sleep. So
Okay.
where you feel like I know the difference between me taking a nap and me passing out. Usually after the 4 hours, I'm functional.
Okay. What about you, Sergeant Santea? With regards to sleep, how much
Horrible.
sleep do you think? Okay, and then that's your regular subjective experience with sleep. Then is
Oh
that
yeah,
it's horrible?
I've since I was a kid, I've had insomnia. It's just I don't sleep well. My mind doesn't shut off.
So how many hours of sleep do you think you need?
Oh, like me? Between 5.5 to 6 hours.
Okay.
6 hours. If I can actually sleep extremely well for 6 hours, I can go for 24 hours nonstop.
All right. So just within those three conversations, we have big variances, right? We have generally 8 hours was mentioned, 4 hours, and then well, let me back up. 8 hours um, with the mention of potentially having too much sleep could make someone feel worse. 4 hours, then we have, the aspect of 5 to 6.5, wherein once that 6.5 is reached on the individual status, I feel like you can go for 24 hours. So with that, there absolutely are individual variances, but there's a very important piece to this. The average person does need approximately 7 to 9 hours to maximize the capacity of what sleep can provide. Now, of course, there's challenges both with understanding sleep. There's challenges with the environment, maybe young kids or any other type of stress, maybe our occupation as aforementioned. But what makes this very interesting and something we need to be cautious of is the thing our body's best at, which is adapting. If you normally sleep about 4.5 hours a night, I'd say because of swing shift, or you like to just stay up and watch movies, whatever it is, whatever habit that you've established, you can make it so that your body is used to operating on 4.5 hours of sleep. And when you wake out of that, you feel as refreshed as you may if you had 7 to 9. But that in no way, shape, or form means that you are getting adequate sleep.
Right.
I promise I just wake up. I just wake up.
Which is a completely different aspect, right? So one issue would be insomnia. One issue would be the idea of once that level of rest has been achieved because of those habits, right? The body stops releasing each of the forms of hormones that it needs to downregulate information and stimuli, which puts you in a fully alert and acute state.
It doesn't matter how tired I am, unless like I'm on the field and I've been up 22 hours. I cannot take a 5-minute nap. If I take a 5-minute nap, I can go for another 20 hours. I just reset.
So is it a difference, like as far as in, cause it's not sleep fast, but as far as in deep sleep, like, so I feel like the 4 hours that I do get, or the rest that I do achieve is the non-dreaming state. I say it like that. Like I know when I'm sleep because I wake up and I'm like, dang, I had a dream. But the 4 hours of me just trying to get rest is dark, and then it's like
That's it. So
That's it.
the subjective experience of this is going to vary widely, right? And interestingly enough, my personal habits with sleep as I've tried to adapt over the years, and the more I've understood, it used to be a lot closer to what Sergeant Santea is saying. And I'm still on the second half of that, right? Where I used to sleep about 4.5, 5 hours a night. And as soon as I woke up, I was good to go. And I really didn't feel I could sleep more. Now I've adjusted, and it took honestly about 8 to 10 months of knowing exactly what I needed to do to train my body in order to sleep longer.
So like bedtimes and
there's so much to it, absolutely, and we will be talking about all of that.
Now, that doesn't mean like when I wake up, I necessarily get out of the bed.
Right.
Because you're still resting, at least,
And that's another critical piece that you're bringing up. So we're going to hit each of these variables. So for me, even now that I've accomplished my duration of sleep that I know that I need, when I'm up, I am up. And that is a very difficult thing to do, but trying to change your habits with anything is challenging. Trying to change it with sleep is one of the hardest things you can do because it literally affects the rest of your day, both planning beforehand, especially if you live with other people, right? Because then you have to work around any of their own habits and things that they want. Maybe they don't care as much about the change of habits that you want to be able to implement, which makes it, completely
Like as far as
non-practical.
eating, some people don't mind eating 10 o'clock at night.
Yes.
I think you're crazy. I'm between 6 and 7 because 9 I'm shutting it down. So yeah, so
Okay.
When I eat late, it's like, and then the next day you wake up. But
So let's get into each of these. So 7 to 9 hours is what's required biologically to truly achieve full cognitive function. Even if you feel that you are cognitively aware, without that, we've seen this time and time again. The more we've looked at different forms of studies for sleep. If you've introduced a significant amount of physical and/or cognitive stress for even 1 to 2 days, then at the end of whatever that stress is, your body and mind may require about 10 hours of sleep in order to fully recover. Now, this is best if done in one full non-ending session, but the body can reach optimal recovery if that sleep is broken up, as long as it's within the same 24-hour period, which are where naps come in.
Right.
And as Sergeant Latney mentioned earlier, a nap is more approximately around a 90-minute period. If you nap for anything less than that, then you're not going to go through all of your stages of sleep, in which each stage of sleep has its own form of benefit, which we'll cover in the next 2 slides.
but not necessarily everybody should take a nap, because if I go to sleep for 20 minutes, I'm done. I'm not sleeping that night.
And that's a very good point, right? So how do you ensure you can manage the hormones that regulate your capability of sleeping at night when you nap, or if you nap? And then can the timing of that nap and the structure of everything around that nap and the structure on your sleep be changed in order to facilitate that? And again, is it challenging? Absolutely. Is it doable? Yes. Practical is, subjective on the person's capabilities. Now, the detriments of that, because we are going to hit on that, the detriments of not getting all of those 7 to 9 hours home can be significant. For every hour of sleep that you are deficient, you can decrease your testosterone production, right? Because that only happens in a specific stage of sleep, which is not only good for being able to change your aesthetics, but general muscle repair. It comes from your body's ability to utilize testosterone. Your ability to understand both complex and creative thinking, or to go through creative thinking and to understand complex problems, is diminished, especially if it's 5 to 6 hours or less. And if you constantly sleep 5 to 6 hours, you may not even understand or be readily cognizant of your detriment because you're so used to the state that you're in. You also have an increased form of lethargy. So that's when you're slow to act, maybe slow to feel, that you care about things. Your overall mood on things will change. Same thing with being a little bit apathetic and not wanting to do things. And then being more irritable, where you feel like you respond to things emotionally before you think about how you can respond to things, which we talk about a lot in resiliency. It also increases your risk of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, everything that you see on screen, right? Basically anything you can die from, you will, including just death itself, your risk of those increase the less sleep that you get.
Right.
The very last part of this is memory. Your body, or your mind rather, takes short-term memory and puts it into long-term memory during certain stages of sleep. That just doesn't happen throughout the day. So we need to ensure we're trying to get these hours, but how do we get there is the big piece. All right, so what are some things you've heard, and Sergeant Watts, you can key in as well. What are some things you've heard about setting up your sleep environment in order to make it the most optimal environment?
Mostly just eliminate distractions.
Okay.
That can alter you not, getting straight to bed and prolong your rest period.
So we'll start with the eliminating distractions. What can be distractions for sleep?
For one, the phone,
Phone?
TV,
Yep.
things of that nature.
Phones, televisions, electronics in general, even books. Some people that try and read right before going to sleep, those can be a huge distraction. It's not just that, the color of the screen and all this other kind of stuff, but anything that'll keep your mind too active.
Yeah, whatever. we feed
Yeah,
it.
even me, I just like my room has to be like pitch black. Like it has to be like a bat cave.
That's the same.
I cover, I have my internet modem, when an hour before even that, I take it, I cover it. My AC has a screen that has lights. I cover every single source of light in my room.
So I consider, and I don't know why I do this, but I call it the baby method. Basically, for me to have to be able to actually really go to sleep, pitch black with some type of sound. I don't know what that is, but
Okay,
it's like
some type of white noise?
Some type of white noise. Yeah, as far as the AC, hearing the fan, whatever it is, just it don't make my brain zone out.
Do you, and you kind of hit on that with that point, but why is white noise generally effective?
Because it's soothing.
Okay, so then the soothing is a subjective aspect of it, right? That's how we're taking it, but why do you think it's effective? Go ahead, John Roger.
To me, if I don't have that fan or that white noise, whatever, any sound, I would be able to pick it up. As
There we go.
opposed to if I have a fan, I'm already acclimated to that husky,
So-
that
so
sound. So
blocks-
if,
it
yeah,
blocks out.
it'll
Yep.
block, so like if something happens on the road, I won't hear it as much as if I'm in complete silence. Anything that'll happen, if I'm in complete silence, I will notice and I
You're
will
alert
wake
to-
up.
you're
And-
alert.
So,
I will be alert.
What happens if you're driving at night on a long road
Hypnotized.
versus driving at night on a long road and it's raining? What is the different experience with that?
So you feel, and it's funny that you say, like,
You're gonna be
you
more
might
aware.
you might get fatigued due to, and I always sit here and say like rain is I feel like it drains you. So like you get the yawning. I feel like it's hypnotizing. It's like one of those things,
There we
because you
go.
got so much going on. You got the windshield wipers going, which I feel like is hypnotizing. You're trying to, a lot of stuff is hypnotizing. Like if you, technically, that's why they tell you to like stop, watch, like.
Oh, it's like Humvee.
Like watching
You know,
lights,
the
yeah.
the perfect vibration, and when
That hum.
it's heated,
Yeah.
you just wanna go to a Humvee. A moving Humvee is the best place to sleep. It knocks me right out.
Which is,
That is the weirdest
But
thing
it's
ever.
Like I said, it puts you in the soothing part. Like that's, some people, I don't know, I had this problem ever since I was a kid. If you start cutting my head, that vibration or that sound
yes.
makes me want to go to sleep.
Okay, so think about this right now. How many of you, or how often do you constantly feel all of the clothing on your body throughout the day?
Constantly? No, but sometimes like if you're tired, whatever, like
When you move, right?
Like,
Yeah,
I think to
it just depends.
reset my,
But you have sensors in your skin
Yeah.
everywhere.
which adapts and you don't notice.
Yeah, we have the ability,
Turn
specifically
stuff
for
off and turn
for
it on.
survival, not necessarily turn things on, turn things off, but you have so many different forms of sensory inputs to your body that in order for your body to focus on something or to downregulate information with regards to sleep, it has the capability of inhibiting some of these signals coming in, like it does for you sitting in a chair for a long time. You're not always feeling your feet on the ground or the
Right.
boot around your foot, right? Or the clothing that's on you. White noise is very similar. Anything that's monotonous and consistent with a pattern, such as raindrops, such as windshield wipers and things of that nature. What it does is the reason you feel it like it's hypnotizing you is because once you establish that pattern, your body, for a reductionist type of view on it, stops paying attention. When it stops paying attention, it downregulates either visual or auditory stimulus, and we pattern that with sleep, which is also why it's going to be extremely dangerous when it comes to driving like that. They feel it's almost like driving intoxicated.
Well, yeah, it's like when you're driving and all of a sudden, how did I get here?
That autopilot piece.
Yeah, the
yes.
autopilot. In the States, in Ohio, going from Indiana to Ohio, like after weapons qualification, that Sunday, I'm like, how did I get here?
Absolutely.
Or it's the doze off and you wake up right
Oh,
before.
That's one of the most frightening
Thank
things to
God,
have.
thank God for the things they do on the side of the road, because I've come close a couple times after being away for like 22 hours.
Which think, yeah, which thinking
Exactly.
about it, and Son Santiago's point about moving Humvee is the best place to sleep. you know, again, things we need to be extremely aware of as leaders with regards to our occupational environment, because you know, the loud engine noise does create that monotonous effect. And if those individuals, due to their overall occupation in general, they're now in working swing shift, they're now only operating at night. If we as leaders don't find the capability of allotting them the time to sleep, we are creating a huge safety risk. Now, pulling that into what we do here, right, in garrison environments in our overall home, having some type of white noise system can be very beneficial. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but if it works for you, use it. We talked about light exposure, right? Because our biology doesn't necessarily differentiate between ultraviolet light from the sun and ultraviolet light from screens and light bulbs and things of that nature. So that messes with something that's called our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is our internal, it's because we're diurnal creatures, we're a diurnal mammal, right? Which means we have a day and night cycle hormonally. We have a specific hormone that starts to release to tell our body it's nighttime. Does anyone know what hormone that is?
Isn't that what they saw at GNC that I?
It is
Yeah.
melatonin.
At
Good.
one point, I was thinking like 10.
Well-
And that helps you also to lose weight. And I was losing weight and I didn't understand because I couldn't sleep for like a couple of weeks.
Or let's talk about these pieces then. So when it comes to supplementation, melatonin is actually not a sleep aid. No, that's how it's sold and that's how it's marketed. It only works for things like jet lag. Because the reason jet lag exists is because your circadian rhythm is altered. You've changed time zones so drastically, like say coming from Puerto Rico to, you know, Poland or Afghanistan, right? You change your normal pattern for how when your body would sleep.
For
That
different time zones.
exactly
Plus,
your
you're gonna
circadian
chew
rhythms.
for like 20 hours.
Yes. So one of the best times to take that specific supplement is for reducing jet lag. That is a normal sleep supplement, unless somehow you're genetically very deficient in that hormone, which can be found in a blood test. It doesn't act as a sleep aid. Um, for And that, of course, we talked about this before we moved over to the slide, and that was the last bullet on the slide. So if I move up to the top of it, I talked about before, naps can be extremely useful, but it only works if it's within the same 24-hour period in order to make up for whatever you rested. Now, Sergeant Sante, I brought up the point that if he takes a nap, he may not be able to sleep that night.
Except like during like military training. Like if we're doing weapons modification, I could take a 5-10 minute nap and I am set. Like I feel new. But that's not normal day-to-day office operation.
Right.
I'm moving, I'm lifting, I'm, going up and down.
That's taking into account the physical and the cognitive stimulus, as well as the anticipation of things that are going on, which is, if you've seen that and felt that difference in those timeframes, you need to consider how you can take those variables and apply them to your normal operations. Typically, anticipation itself is, because anticipation is a stress. Stress isn't necessarily negative, right? When we turn stress negative, it's anxiety. But stress can be a positive a factor in our body. When we anticipate things and how we manage the thought process will drastically change how our body is releasing certain hormones, and then everything else is affected from there. Our body only really communicates because we have 11 systems in our body, right? Respiratory system, cardiovascular system, etc. Our body only communicates through those 11 systems through two of them, that being our endocrine system, which are our hormones, and our nervous system, which is our electrical system. So electricity and chemistry are the only two ways we can technically communicate. So with that, hormones make up more than 50% of our communication, because our electrical system is primarily for movement with that. So hormones do change a huge part of our body with it. But if you are going to nap, the big piece is to try and find time and to set up an environment where you can get approximately a 90-minute nap session, which seems like a lot, but that'll make more sense when we get into the actual sleep stages. When the new FM7-22 came out, there's actually an entire chapter now on sleep and talking about napping and talking specifically with dialogue to commanders and leadership on the importance of, when you have the capability to allow your soldiers to sleep, you should allow them to sleep, including during the work day.
And I sat here and said this, and this is funny, but I said this in my previous unit. that the military should go based off of like a daycare, right? You come in, you work, you eat your food, you take a nap, and then you work some more. Only for the simple fact is that you look at how a child like works.
Mhm.
Literally, they wake up, a little drowsy in the morning, but you get them going. They play. They eat, they nap, and then they back to fully being functional again. So that's why I was like, I think that nap in between that at work. I mean, the army ain't going for that, but that.
Well, but that's the point. Not
Yeah,
necessarily.
It's in the regulation.
It is now. Well, not necessarily regulation, but it is in doctrine, right? So it's not that the Army isn't going for that. We have seen that it's effective. Now, we are a very challenging logistical, organization where some of us are going to need to be more active in the morning, some of us need to be more active in the afternoon or evening. We have concurrent and constant operations that are going on, some of them more critical than others. But this is where us as leaders, we need to be able to look at the overall planning and scope of our operations and be able to see how can we have, not necessarily everyone take a nap at one point in time. It's not on the training schedule, right, for this entire year to take a nap.
Have your
But
minutes.
maybe in sections that is a thing. Maybe in certain areas, one section or squad or area is able to recover while another is doing a different form of work, and they kind of switch like you would for swing shifts in different areas.
Rotation.
And
Rest cycle.
that will increase overall performance and capabilities rather than be at a detriment to everything. Okay. Now, at least covering the supplementation piece to get further into the stages of sleep for time components. Another aspect here is that caffeine absolutely is not a supplement for sleep.
Right.
And some people look at that and they think, why would I ever consider that? But in a lot of cultures, yes, in a lot of cultures take some East Asian cultures and then some European cultures specifically drink different forms of caffeinated tea with dinner and coffees with dinner as a dessert, as a supplement for sleep. Now, you can still fall asleep with caffeine in your system, but it will affect how your body is going through various stages of sleep. Caffeine itself is a central nervous system stimulant that can last in your body, has a half-life of about 8 to 10 hours. So if you have it within your system, your body absolutely positively will not be able to downregulate as much as it otherwise could in order to allow you to go through all 4 stages of sleep. So it's recommended that you do not consume caffeine about 8 to 10 hours before you sleep, right? Which is part of the habits that people do. Yeah. So when individuals such as yourself, you mentioned in our training session or our education clinic on Tuesday, Sergeant Rodriguez, that you train in the afternoon. For our soldiers that work in the morning and they can't find time to go to the gym or to go and run, and they want to in the afternoon or evening, and they're chronically taking, consuming pre-workout at those times, they may not be aware of how much that's affecting their overall health because they could still be sleeping 8 hours a night, taking their pre-workout at say 4 or 5 p.m. But even though they're going through 8 hours, their shift through the proper stages may be at a detriment, and they could be increasing the risk of injury as well as, excuse me, cognitive degradation because of those habits. Right. So again, awareness is a big piece with this. At the same time, alcohol is very similar, right? Most people that consume alcohol do it at night.
So they can.
Or some people take that nightcap, right? So, but alcohol can absolutely prevent your body from getting into stage 3 and 4 of sleep altogether. They do something very similar to sleeping pills, which are also very, 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 very bad to take with regards to all 4 stages of sleep. So if you consume sleeping pills or alcohol, it's very similar to taking some type of anesthetic, in which what it does is it knocks you unconscious rather than putting you to sleep.
So you don't have a body transition of being conscious to going to sleep to whatever the resting period is to deep sleep to actually,
Yes, so it's not that it doesn't allow the transition to sleep. What ends up happening is you go unconscious and you stay in stages 1 and 2 of sleep. Your body stays in that complete state of unconsciousness, but you don't fluctuate through the 4 stages of sleep every 90 minutes, which your body does. When you sleep for 8 hours, your body actually goes through all 4 stages of sleep in different intervals based on what you've patterned throughout those 90 minutes. And there's different things that take place within different stages. But alcohol and caffeine and sleeping pills prevent certain stages which have a long-term detriment. So with that, the detriments that you can have, as we kind of discussed earlier, now let's take this into a quantitative metric. If you sleep only about 6.5 hours a night, you start to see the degradation by, maybe day 2 down to day 7 with overall capability for cognitive performance. And we've seen this so much across the board, regardless of occupation, age, and biological sex, that we can say it's a standard. It's not necessarily an abnormal variable.
But there's people that are also hyper.
Yes, but here, that's what comes back to what we talked about before. Your body can adapt to what you do,
It's been my
and then
life.
you won't see the detriment anymore, but it's still there. You're just not perceiving it.
So in this case, let's just sit here and say that, like in his case, that's all he knows. Do your body or mind or brain actually tells it like, I listen, shut down? Like one of those things where now you are in a detriment because your body shutting down is
Correct.
as a reaction of not having proper sleep. So
Well, think of it like this. Think about it as, and this is again, it's a very reductionist way of thinking about it, but think about it as a battery that's recharging each night, right? So essentially what's happening is he's getting used to always charging his battery to maybe 70%, in this case being his cognition and physical capabilities. And really, he sees that 70 as 100 because that's all he ever hits. He doesn't get into that 80, 90, and 100% range because he's not able to fully get through all those stages of sleep. Anyone have any water? It's not dry. But those are one of those challenges for our soldiers that are chronically in that state.
I can reach close to 8 hours during the week, but then there's a side effect. On Sunday, when I slept for 8 hours or something like that, well, guess what? Monday, I can't sleep well from Sunday to Monday because I'm so well rested on Sunday that I can't fall asleep from Sunday to Monday. And it
Right.
happened this week. And when I have my smartwatch and it tells me my overall sleeping cycle was a little bit over 8 hours, given it throws you like, 30 minutes of being awake because I
Right.
probably went to the bathroom or whatever, which I was able to thankfully fall back to sleep. But I woke up, I don't know, let's say 8 a.m. on a Sunday. Oh, that was a painful thing to try and sleep from Sunday to Monday because I was so well rested that I should have, I just couldn't go to sleep.
Thank you. Well, with that, what do you do when you're laying in bed and you can't sleep? Does anyone know what you're supposed to do? Say you've been trying to sleep for 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, it's a constant battle in my mind of everything.
Supposed to get up, do something different for about 20, 25, 30 minutes, then try it again.
Oh, really?
Exactly.
Get out of bed?
You are not supposed to stay in bed. In fact, staying in bed is one of the worst things you can do when you can't sleep.
I'll try that.
Now,
So like you wanna make the body, like make that habit of every time we lay here, it's strictly to sleep.
yes.
Otherwise, the body's gonna take it like, okay, we're gonna chill here. This is what we're doing.
So that, and Sergeant Rodriguez brings up a good point.
It's
Setting up
supposed
a-
to sleep for like 6
Setting up an optimal sleep environment.
My whole-
So here are the key variables. One, as little to no light as possible, as each of you mentioned. 2, temperature is a huge thing. The body sleeps optimally around 65 degrees at an external temperature. Right, so you have the capability of actually regulating the temperature in your room. 65 degrees has been shown the absolute best.
I have it at 67.
66, 67 can be decent. Your body actually lowers its temperature when it starts going through stage 2 and 3 of sleep naturally.
Right.
So you can expedite its ability to get into those stages by already lowering the external temperature, which also involves how much clothing you're wearing, the sheets on your bed, and things of that nature. Only going into your bedroom or wherever you're sleeping, not only the bed, as Sergeant Rodriguez mentioned, but only going into the area where you sleep in order to sleep, right? Or, extra activities as an adult, but only going into those areas for that purpose,
it's that
trains your body for that
the
habit.
habit part. And that's, I found
Yes.
out literally every single time I sleep or sit on a specific part of my couch, it's night. Yeah, no lie. Like, so it's the little awning with that, when you want to relax and chill and watch TV, my body tells me like, oh, look, You usually go to sleep here.
habits establish everything, yes.
So,
So
Not
that's
having,
why I sleep so well during, weapons school or whatever. I'm in this foreign environment and it's
it
like,
could be, absolutely. Not introducing any type of additional form of anxiety, so cognitive stress, which is why, as we talked about on Tuesday, trying to sleep before some type of event or competition almost never happens for people.
oh yeah. No,
Then that
yeah,
comes
no.
back to the anticipation.
yeah, they always go, oh, I'm gonna get a good night rest
Yes.
before the test.
Trying to
No, you ain't.
sit down or lay down and think about how to solve a problem, tomorrow's event, and see how whatever is happening in the day, trying to come up with a solution to things is a huge thing that stops people from sleeping. You typically want to have your last meal about an hour or two before you lay down. You want to start down regulating your stimulus approximately 60 to 90 minutes before you start sleeping. So when it comes to being on your phone, television, reading a book, engaging in any type of complex conversations or any of that, you want to start eliminating all of that 60 to 90 minutes before you go to sleep. But what do we normally do with sleep with our soldiers? How does that process normally go, you think?
Oh, I'll tell you when to go to sleep, lights out.
Well, in basic IT, yeah, but not necessarily for us to our soldiers, but our soldier and their normal home, right? They get home from work. They maybe eat dinner, communicate with their family. How does that process, do you think, looks before they go to bed?
Oh, I gotta-
Meetings for like an hour.
On their phone?
I mean, they
Scrolling
probably on the
Instagram?
phone, but
Trying to
in
be,
my mind is I'm getting ready for, or I'm getting prepared for tomorrow. It should be.
What do I need to do
What
tomorrow?
I need to do tomorrow.
For me, actually,
Hey, I
it's
got
more
this
of
in the morning. Oh, I gotta be up at 6 o'clock.
distracting myself from, I need to disengage, so I'll be watching, whatever show or whatever, because I just don't want to think about tomorrow.
Yeah.
I already sit up and pretty much know what's happening, so like when I don't want a big thing that I did it in my last unit, and I don't care if there was a snowstorm, I would never, ever, ever, ever take my work computer home. I don't do that under it. It has to be a day that I'm actually know I'm not gonna go in. Maybe I'll take the computer, but I don't take my computer home.
To separate your work and home life.
Yes, my home
That's
is
good.
not for work.
But you mentioned watching something so you can, kind of take your mind and everything else. Do you watch something up until the point you go to bed?
Problem. Now, here's the other problem. I've tried to where, okay, it's an hour before, maybe, like if I try to go to sleep before 10,
Mhm.
I'm waking up. And it's 100%, my,
Same thing.
I am so afraid of
3 o'clock is the
going,
dayline.
going to bed at around 10:15 to even 10:30, because historically it happened. I, not that long ago, maybe less than a month ago, I went to bed around 9:40-ish.
Mhm.
Woke up at 1. Ooh, ready to go. And I'm
So-
like, I'm tired because I didn't sleep well, but I'm energized.
Right. So with that, as we've discussed some of these other variables, even the anticipation of you looking at the clock and thinking,
I only got
if I don't sleep by this time,
Yeah, that'll sabotage.
I'm gonna wake up this time. You're already changing a lot of these effects, and it's hard. It's really hard to change that habit, right? But by changing your entire environment and establishing your new habit for what you're thinking about, everything in your room, not being engaged with these other activities, waking up is okay. It happens to a lot of individuals, and you can either go back to sleep in the next 10 to 20 minutes by staying there laying rested. If you can't and you're thinking about sleep, therefore unable to, then you get up, you go do something else for a while and establish being able to come back to that environment and sleep. Being able to change your body temperature can help a lot. So like a warm shower as part of your down, like your down regulation of activity, your warm shower in that 60-90 period before you go into that cold room to lay down and sleep is another big piece. Magnesium can help as well. About was it like about 500 milligrams of magnesium in that 60-90 period can aid a lot of individuals in the transitions between the stages of sleep, which is what people are struggling with when they feel that they have forms of insomnia, right? So those stages of sleep are what you see on screen here now. And in general, we have 2 types of sleep. We have non-rapid eye movement and actual rapid eye movement, otherwise known as REM. The first 3 stages of sleep take place in non-rapid eye movement, which is when your body recovers, and in rapid eye movement is when your mind recovers. So as you'll see on the screen, stage 1 is light sleep. This is where even if you feel you can slightly interact with the outside world, but you're just laying there and you're rested, that is still considered light sleep. It's when you feel calm. Sometimes when people are drifting into light sleep is when you see those quick jerks of, your head, like you would be on an airplane or on a bus. Did anyone see me, right? Or your arm or leg moving. This is also where if an individual doesn't, depending on their genetic disposition or certain environmental factors, if their body doesn't properly go through stage 1 of sleep in the potential transition to stage 2, which is just a wavelength change in your brain, this is where something like sleep paralysis comes in. So like for me, I had to adjust my sleep patterns that I talked about earlier in order to try and get 8 hours of sleep regularly, which took a long time, because naps are almost not an option for me. Because when I try and nap, if I haven't introduced enough fatigue to want to sleep or to need to sleep, I will almost positively have sleep paralysis.
And that's your brain fully functional, but you're awake and asleep at the same time, basically.
Somewhat.
You can't.
So your body actually inhibits your somatic part of your nervous system, your ability to control your musculoskeletal system. So you don't sleepwalk, which is sleepwalking is the opposite. So sleepwalking is when your body doesn't inhibit it inhibits your awareness, but doesn't inhibit your movement. Sleep paralysis is where it doesn't inhibit your awareness, but it does inhibit your movement. And then you start to kind of meld that dreamlike state and things you'd be dreaming out with your real life situation. You're in the room, you're laying down, but you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I got some.
It's extremely frightening. But the stage 1 to stage 2 sleep and the inability to get through those is generally where that happens.
So basically, light and deep sleep is where the body is. It's like.
Yes, well, between light to deep sleep
Okay.
is when the body is repairing, but not necessarily the mind.
I have a question. So as somebody who's never experienced sleep paralysis,
Yes.
so for people who do experience it, whenever you do experience it, are you like aware, like?
It's like you're being paralyzed.
But,
Yes.
but like, like some people like freak out.
Right.
But after, let's say a couple of times of that happening to you, do you at some point be like, okay, I know, like, I'm sleep paralysis, let me not scratch.
I mean, that's a.
Do those thoughts come
Me
up?
personally, the research that I did, they make movies about it, all types of craziness. It's time to deal with something else. But to me, every time it happens like unconscious, like meaning like I don't know that I'm going through sleep paralysis because you're asleep but awake at the same time. So it's like you ain't see me just trying to move, you ain't hear me humming, and you think that you're doing all of this. It's like nothing. Like you're paralyzed. You're dead.
There's subjective experiences to it. So for myself, it's happened so frequently through my life that I know I'm undergoing sleep paralysis. However, it doesn't to me diminish how frightening it is, because generally something else is you're still dreaming, right? So the idea of you're still having things that wouldn't normally happen in the room,
Right.
which is where you get the feeling of potentially a presence or something else is happening, and you can't interact with it or anyone else or do anything any point in time. You can't control breathing, blinking, and it's almost like you're trying to pull yourself back into your body, which feels like it can take forever. And the hard part about that is once you do awake, there's typically no transition because you were already felt awake and conscious. So now you're suddenly awake, and then there's a trust issue.
Right.
Are you awake or are you still dreaming? And then when you try and sleep again, are you going to go through that again? Which can then therefore delay sleep. So it becomes a very compounding issue. But with that, it's very important. Same thing with sleepwalking. There's individuals that sleepwalk that go and fully make meals and eat meals, or like can walk into traffic while sleepwalking. So those are more of a genetic disposition that needs to be addressed, right? You absolutely can. Now, stage 2 of sleep is when you actually start to become unresponsive to other people, right? When in stage 1, someone can say your name and you can kind of come out of it. In stage 2, the person is, now unresponsive. That's what we generally see as sleep. That lasts generally for about 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
It can be a little bit less for some people, but that's the general time frame. Stage 3 is when you get into deep sleep. Now, this is where your body starts releasing growth hormone. This is when your body actually starts releasing testosterone, even greater rates if you've introduced resistance training throughout your day and you've changed your dietary habits to expedite that process or to increase that process of testosterone. This is where your body actually repairs its muscle from all of those training sessions that you do. Running, working out, things like that. That all happens in stage 3 of sleep. When you wake up from this, whenever you wake up and you feel groggy, you feel unaware, and it takes you a little bit to move, that's because you woke up in this stage of sleep. The feeling of how you, how you feel when you wake up will tell you what stage you were in when you were asleep. So if you wake up and you feel like there was no transition, right, that kind of you were just there, that's you woke up in stage 1 of sleep. Right, stage 2 is usually when you feel pretty rested. There was a general good transition from it. 3 and 4 kind of have that grogginess piece to it. Now, stage 4 is REM, right? That rapid eye movement, and that's why it's described that way, because you can actually see a constant movement of those eyes. That is where you can take your your short-term memory and store long-term memory. This is where you get most of your cognitive repair and cognitive acuity. It only lasts for about, usually about 10 to 20 minutes on average. We can last up to 60 minutes. But you go through this cycle of each stage of sleep within a 90-minute time frame, as you'll see on screen now. So in general, 8 hours, you'll see that you're going to go through each of your 4 stages of sleep, but usually in the later hours of the night or throughout whatever you're sleeping, once you hit maybe hour 5 or 6, you stop going through stage 3 and 4 for the most part. That happens in the earlier parts of sleep. So if you do have any type of watch or device that's tracking your sleep, and you're like, well, I'm only getting 6 hours of sleep, but I'm still getting enough deep sleep, that it could absolutely be possible, because you typically get your deep sleep earlier on in your cycles rather than later on.
Like today, I woke up tired but clear, because and now that you're mentioning this, when I'm looking into the app, I had a total of 1 hour and 21 minutes of REM.
Good.
So like, yeah, I woke up and lay in bed today because like my body was like, but my mind was like, start seeing some memes. Like I mentally, I felt better than physically, unlike the previous day, which I felt super rested, like physically, but mine was a little bit like, ugh.
Right.
And then when I look into my tracker, it's like, yeah, it happened opposite. Like I got a lot of good deep sleep and everything, but REM was really low.
Every day. Well, this is why we need to be able to have these conversations, right? Because a lot of our soldiers are in the same situation. They may be physically inactive, not eating optimally, and not sleeping well, and in which they're burning they're getting the trifecta, as you mentioned, of basically burning the candle. If they had 3 wicks at this point, right, with regards to their overall health. And the hard part is a lot of individuals don't necessarily see the detriment now, so they may not think about it now, right? And it's a common thing with psychology about, would you rather receive a reward now or receive that reward later, right? Most people take that reward now.
Yeah.
It takes a substantial difference between that reward to make someone want it later. But all of these things are typically what increase people's risk of everything that happens when people are older. So when people start getting, into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they start saying, hey, this is broken, this isn't repairing, I don't feel like this anymore, it's not generally because they just hit that age.
I'm ready.
It's generally because they've had several decades of suboptimal recovery.
Yeah, like
for their
when
body.
you start training, like you get like, I have a week that I train great, but this week has been a little bit more sluggish than the previous week, which I hit harder than I've hit this. And I think I did sleep a little bit better last week than what I'm doing this.
Absolutely.
So if you're trying to improve and train,
Well, and we'll talk about that piece for it too. What is a pullback or a quick check on learning, if you want to think of it that way? We talked about physiology and we've talked about exercise. We talk about calories being a measurement of energy, but what's energy within the body? How do we measure energy utilization in the body?
Oh, no,
Do you remember, Sergeant Watts? What's our body's energy currency?
Calorie?
Not calories.
oh, fat.
I mean, it's
That's where you store energy.
Nope.
burn carb, which gives energy.
It has to do with our energy systems. All of our energy systems produce and use this for us to
Oh,
do.
air.
Carbs?
So it is ATP. Yep,
Oh.
adenosine triphosphate.
Oh, yeah.
So
okay.
Oh.
yes, the adenosine piece of that. Every single time your body's just move, even if you're not doing exercise, you're just going through the day. When adenosine comes off of that adenosine triphosphate, it builds up in your adenosine receptors, which are in your mind. At the end of the day, once your adenosine receptors hit a certain threshold, that's what tells your body it's tired. So when you do physical activity, you expedite that degree of fatigue because you're actually utilizing a lot more adenosine triphosphate. It's one of the additional benefits of physical exercise is that it aids your ability to enter a rest period. Right. This is also why when Sir Santa I brought up earlier, when he's out and he's because even cognition takes a lot of energy, right? For the amount of power that we have within our cerebral capacity as humans, it requires most of our energy in the day. It's a huge portion. So whenever you're very stressed, you're very aware, you have a lot of tasks to do, both physically and mentally. That's what makes you tired, is a buildup of adenosine.
You actually burn calories.
You do. You actually some of the largest caloric expenditure comes from your brain, just from cognitive thinking throughout the day. Now, at the same time, this is also when it comes back to caffeine, why it can be so not necessarily detrimental to your health, but for sleep, because what caffeine does is it attaches to your adenosine receptors and it does not allow adenosine to attach. This is where people think caffeine wakes them up, but instead all it does is it doesn't allow them to notice fatigue, which there is a significant difference within those two. Right. Okay. So whether with you, Sergeant Watts, or anyone else that's in the teams room or anyone else in the physical room, are there any questions on things that we've talked about so far with, circadian rhythm, the types of sleep, or things like that?
Yes, I got a question, Sunrise.
Go ahead.
What about sleeping with your eyes open? Like, what does that typically?
About you want to train yourself to do it because.
No, I'm just saying, like, just what if you sleep with your eyes open?
So it is possible to sleep with eyes open. I forgot what that actual diagnosis is called for individuals that undergo that, and that actually brings up another good point, an interesting point rather that I'll talk about. But your eyes are obviously our tool that we use for visual stimuli, right? To be able to take in light and process information. You are capable of completely inhibiting that throughout throughout sleep, rather, which is the same thing. If someone is in sleep or in deep sleep, you can open their eyes and they may not wake up, even though their light is actually hitting the retina and they're getting information in. So it's possible to take place. Obviously, it's not ideal, but I don't remember what the actual syndrome's called. But what's your question with the capability of that taking place?
No, I was just asking because I was told that I sleep with my eyes open. So I was just trying to figure out if it was something underlying that caused that. But
so there's a genetic cause for that because you have circular muscles around your mouth and around your eyes. A lot of the muscles that control our eyelids. And what's typically happening is that the electrical signal that would tell your eyelids to stay shut is not being sent, or rather the opposing signal is being sent to lengthen the muscle around the eye, which actually opens the eyelid. Now you can, I'm not sure if you've ever seen a physician for this, or even if you want to, because it doesn't necessarily cause a detriment to your sleep. It could potentially cause a detriment to your long-term eye health due to your eyes becoming drier at night without the ability to blink, unless you are also blinking when you're sleeping, then that would resolve itself. But if you haven't seen a physician for it and you're interested, you may want to, just to be able to ensure that one, again, you are not drying out your eyes because they need to stay lubricated, and then two, they may be able to either issue some type of muscle relaxer or find some type of way to repattern that training or retrain that pattern so you can be able to close your eye when you're sleeping.
okay, that's good to know, Sunrise. Appreciate it.
All right, not a problem. Now, that's an interesting thing I want to bring up, though. Why do you think we dream?
I think it's It just depends. So if I look at it, I guess is our unconsciousness.
I mean, you are unconscious,
Yeah,
you're
Because
subconscious.
the
It's
mind,
subconscious.
the mind doesn't shut down.
That's, that's very true. Mine absolutely doesn't. shut down.
Realistically, the mind never shuts down. It's always running.
We hear about the idiom of sleep on it, or at least the saying of sleep on it, right? We actually do some of our most complex problem solving when we are asleep. And
Like
we've
sometimes
always
you wake up and it's like, oh crap, let me write that down.
maybe right, and sometimes
It
we
happens.
go
I
through complex
usually-
thought
I
without
usually-
understanding.
I usually revisit what happened, which I think like is like restoring peace. Like if I can remember what happened in my dream, what happened in the day, it usually it plays out. It's not really cool.
You remember your, I don't.
I don't remember my dreams either.
Yeah.
Now and it is a very subjective aspect of it, but we've always wondered this, and there's a lot of mysticism and esoteric thoughts around dreaming and things like that. But
I think it's the imagination.
I think David Eagleman was one of the primary researchers that recently, and when I say recently, I mean within the last like 5 to 6 years, kind of fine-tuned why we dream. He's a neurologist. In fact, he has several really good books out on many of these things. But what he and his team have generally found is, as Sergeant Santea brought up, your mind never stops, even when you're asleep. What they studied was what happens with the occipital aspect of your brain. Basically, there's your brain that focus on the vision. What happens to those when someone's blind? And what we see is when someone's blind, other areas of the brain typically encroach upon that rather than just leaving that dormant. Maybe another part of your area, maybe it's your auditory sense, maybe it's your memory, something else encroaches in that part of the brain and uses that processing power, for lack of better terminology, in order instead of it going to waste. And we see the same thing with people that are paraplegic. We see the same things with people that are amputated. Whenever a part of the mind typically goes dormant, another part of the mind typically starts to take over that to use that processing power. So with that as a baseline for a hypothesis on looking into this, what they found is the reason it is now theorized that we dream is that when you, and this is why I'm thinking about, because what Sergeant Watts brought up, when you close your eyes and you have everything's black and you're sleeping, you don't have any more visual stimulus. Because you don't have visual stimulus, your other parts of your brain can start taking over your visual components of your brain.
It's funny that you
So-
say, like, cause I'm visualizing like the actual brain, like, oh, well.
Yeah, you don't need it.
Look at.
So the theory is that dreaming protects our visual capability because while keeping it active, which is why you can visualize that piece of information that aren't actually taking place, right? Your imagination. By you being able to visualize that, it protects the brain from taking over the rest of the visual aspect of your cortex, which I find quite fascinating. Right? But anyway, I think that's an interesting tidbit to throw into this conversation. Okay. Now, to kind of bring that to a close, as we're hitting the end of this overall lesson, I've put on screen some things to kind of change effective sleep habits, everything that we've already kind of talked about verbally. One of the biggest things is setting up a consistent routine. The body does adaptation better than anything else. Anything that you do regularly, because your body doesn't have a moral compass necessarily. Your body also doesn't think in complex terms such as this, I want this to happen, I don't want this to happen, this is good, this is bad. It just adapts to what you normally do. So anything that we constantly introduce, our body will adapt to, whether that we use that in a positive sense, such as physical training, right? Or we use that in order to establish better behavioral habits, such as with sleep and with our relationship with food and things of that nature. So physical exercise being, ceasing all physical exercise approximately 3 hours before bed, alcohol consumption about 6 hours before the bed if possible, avoiding heavy meals about 2 hours before bedtime, creating that sleep-friendly environment, which is that dark, potentially some type of white noise, dark room with some potentially type of white noise, 65 to maybe 67 degrees, however you need to modify your room or your whatever you're sleeping with, not going to that bedroom or that bed except for to sleep, and about 60 to 90 minutes before bed, cutting off all phone or television utilization or anything that would cause any type of anxiety or complex thoughts. Those are what you need to do in order to make sure you can maximize your overall sleep. The 3 links you see below, at least the top and the bottom one, are actual military links. We have some very good sleep neurologists in the Army. The middle one is one that they've helped work with as well. So these are some pieces to help work on overall recovery. We've talked about active and passive recovery as well. So how you program actual training days and non-training days to aid your ability to recover. And that's going to culminate everything that we've come together today to discuss on sleep. So at this point in time, do I have any questions on active passive recovery or we talked about overtraining and overreaching as well in the beginning, or sleep?
I've seen a couple of like videos of, you know, those rooms that are soundproof,
Yes.
like they use for testing or whatever, and like people cannot, like, you can't stay in them. Like you can't stay in them. People, you know, obviously there's no noise, so you start hearing your own heartbeat and stuff like that. And researchers and you know whatnot, they're like, yeah, most people can only stay there for like an hour, a couple hours before they start losing their mind.
Absolutely.
I need to get out of here.
So I got a question.
Because it's just you. There's no external sound, it's just you.
So incorporating the active passive.
Yes.
As far as is there a way, like as far as in like my trainings, like I said, I have been more, it's more me thinking of, you know, it seemed like it's more active.
Okay.
It's just I only have one passive day. Will be that Sunday. I'm talking about something.
Okay.
But it's more of the active. So we would say if I lift heavy, I call it lifting heavy Monday. And that Thursday, I'm like, but is it still is it passive? Because you said it would be passive it'll still be active if I'm doing any type of.
Well, you are being active in general, but it's not active recovery unless your volume and your intensity is approximately 30% below what you normally do, which means that you're not approaching even close to muscle failure.
Okay.
Right. So even if you're lifting light, you can lift light or even do calisthenics without weights altogether and still get to close to muscle failure and have a very intense training session.
Right.
Right. So those are still considered training as long as it's obviously consistent. You're progressively overloading what you're doing. But an active recovery day means that if you normally go in and do, say 3 sets of 10 at 100 pounds, then you're going to go in there and you may do, I don't know, maybe like 1 set of, well, maybe say 2 sets of 5 at 70 pounds,
Okay.
right, of the same movement pattern. So you have a lot left in the tank. You're still going through the motions. You're still introducing external load in the system, but you're not stressing the body, which is still going to be allowing it to recover. And so that's why generally the 4th week of every training cycle should be exactly the same week as your prior ones, but the intensity and volume are just lower. The only thing you can't actively recover on, only things that you can't actively recover on are speed days and anaerobic training days like sprints, because by definition, they're working your anaerobic energy systems. And the only way to work your anaerobic energy systems is to introduce enough intensity to force your body to use it. So if the intensity is not there, your body won't use it. You're just not using it, right? So an aerobic run isn't an active recovery for a long distance run, isn't an active recovery for a sprint. It's a different training session.
Okay.
Now you can do a long distance run at a very slow pace that won't challenge you, and that would be an active recovery session for a run, or like a foot march, right? You can load up a foot march and just go very slow where it wouldn't be challenging. That would be an active recovery for that type of session. But it's not passive and it's not training at that point. Yeah. Good. All right. Any questions on your end, Sergeant Watts?
Negative, Sunrise. Good.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this recording to a close. As always, I appreciate everyone's participation in this clinic, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Thank you very much for being here.